Today we are going to talk about violins. I will give you a brief history of the violin as an instrument. It has roots in ancient India as a folk instrument, ancient Mesopotamia, Middle East, some of the predecessors of the violin, string instrument, violin-like string instrument with the bow, had a name a long time ago like kemanje, which even today is used amongst the Rome population in some of the countries in Europe. When they call violin, instead calling it fiddle here for the folk music, there they call it cemane, awfully similar to the root word kemanje. The renaissance of the violin making took place starting in the mid 1500s in Italy and reached its peak in the early 1700s, in the first half of the 18th century. Two major schools of violin making, two major cities that were very prolific with numerous violin makers competing in the family business of violin production were located in two cities of Brescia and Cremona, very close to the city of Milano. Coincidentally and tragically, that is the epicenter of the coronavirus nowadays, in the region of Lombardy in the northern Italy. Three most known and most famous violin makers of that time are three families. Family Amati, Stradivari, and Guarneri. Each of those families had many members that span over a century. The smallest family, Stradivari family, Antonio Stradivari, had two sons that were much less successful than he was. They continued business a little bit after his death, but I would not consider them worth mentioning. Omobono and Francesco Stradivari. It was very interesting that if you look at the instruments of that time, you would see on the labels Antonio Stradivarius. Why? When the man's name was Antonio Stradivari. Well, it was in vogue at that time to write the vignettes, the labels inside the violins in Latin. So the entire label would be written in Italian, in Latin, and they probably thought that was cool or very sophisticated. Anyhow, Stradivari started his violin making as an apprentice in the shop of Amati family. And later on, because he was so good at it, he split from the Amati shop and continued working on his own. He had a very long life. By some accounts, he lived 97 years, by some other accounts 93, because the birth certificate was not authenticated. Really, nobody knows when the old man was born. But he still had a very long life compared to, let's say, his successor in the Guarneri family, Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù, who lived approximately only half of the lifespan of Stradivari, but really made beautiful instruments. All of those instruments go in tens of millions of dollars nowadays on the market. I would like to show you some examples from the Chimay Cultural Foundation in Taiwan, which I visited a few years back as a guest of the family of the founder, Mr. Lee, who started that foundation. I was very honored to be there for a week and play all of those instruments that I will show you. One of the earliest examples was violin by Giovanni Paolo Maggini. You see how the model was very rough in 1620. Many of them were made in 1500s. Very rough F-holes, double purfling, intarsions, if that is the proper way of calling this kind of a purfling that goes into the body of the instrument. Then we could go quickly to let's say a Stradivari. Let's find the Stradivari. Oh, this is a cello. Let's say a Stradivari example. Let's say Antonio Stradivari, Cremona, 1722. beautiful scroll, beautiful formats, very elegant F-holes, fine choice of wood. You could see a really great craftsmanship of the Stradivari. But my favorite instrument is this one. No, this is that one was the next one I'm going to show you. Even not this one, but let me go. This is Lafont Siskovsky Guarneri del Gesù. You could see how beautiful the varnish is, how beautiful the design of del Gesù was, who was allegedly a bohemian and far less organized and disciplined as Antonio Stradivari was. So you see 1733, it belonged in the history to two famous violinists, Lafont and Siskovsky, and that's why it has that name. Later on, Guarneri del Gesù became a little bit more not artistic but wild in his design. This is one of very famous violins where he went totally bold with the shape of those F-holes. This violin has a nickname Ole Bull. It was made at the end of Guarneri del Gesù's life. And then I have another example how the instruments were made in other countries. For instance, there was one from Germany. I have to find it quickly now. For instance, you could see the difference in this is Jakob Steiner. Not the same level. Of course, we don't look at the tailpiece because it really doesn't matter. You look at the F-holes, they're rather stubby, short. I don't know if a student could tell what I could see from those pictures, but the design is not as gorgeous as the great Italian makers. I just wanted to share a little bit of my passion for the fine violins with you, and hopefully that was educational for all of you. I had a chance in my lifetime to be very fortunate to play possibly close to 100 Stradivari violins and maybe 50 del Gesù violins, which is a very special feeling, and they're easy to play. They're a lot easier to play than a bad violin, and they're very inspirational, very inspiring. I'm still working on my first Stradivari, so bear with me, and maybe in one of the future videos I could show you some instrument that actually belongs to me instead only the ones that belong to the one of the finest collections, actually I believe the finest collection in the world, Chimay Foundation, located in Taiwan. Thank you.